Hello and welcome to the In Publishing podcast. My name is James Evelegh and I'm the editor of In Publishing. My guest this time is Will Page, the former chief economist at Spotify, who earlier this year published a book called Tarzan Economics, 8 Principles in Pivoting Through Disruption. The book analyses how the music industry responded to digital disruption and the lessons to be learnt for other sectors. I talked to Will about those lessons and in particular what they mean for the publishing industry. In our chat, Will challenges publishers to rethink their business model.
I'll be bold here. I think the best thing newspapers could do today is, guess what? ... Stop selling newspapers. Just like back in the music industry, Simon David Miller, a wonderfully progressive executive at EMI, said to Guy Hands in 2009, the best thing you could do today is stop selling CDs. It's killing your business whilst upholding your business.
He looks at the looming points of tension between creators and publishers.
The straw that will break the camel's back on this for the publishing industry is when the creators, not the publishing houses, start to look at, duration-based models of compensation. If I'm going to be paid on the word, how about you pay me on how many of those words were actually read? And that would be a real touch point for the industry to explore.
And he's frank about what he sees as the scale of the challenge facing the publishing industry.
There's some real sort of stare into the abyss questions that need to be asked about this sector for it to work out where it needs to go. Because the key point is the consumer's already there. You're playing catch up.
Before we hear more from Will, a quick word about our valued sponsors. We would like to thank our podcast sponsor, Air Business, a market leader in distribution and subscription management services for the publishing industry. Its end-to-end service includes subscriber acquisition and marketing strategy, worldwide distribution, digital mail and e-commerce fulfillment, and warehouse and freight logistics. For more information, visit airbusiness.com. Will Page, welcome to the In Publishing podcast.
Thank you for having me, James. Great to be on the show.
Now, can we start off with just looking at the premise of your book? What is the premise of Tarzan Economics?
My belief is that music matters because it got there first. And what I mean by that is music woke up to piracy in 1999, Napster in America, Winamp over here in Europe, and it completely upended the business. If we pause there for a second and think about this, music is built off copyright. And what online piracy did was remove the right to control copying, which is what copyright stands for. So we had to stare into the abyss at a very early stage in this digitization of media and really work out a way of getting out of this mess that we found ourselves in. Now, the 20 years that followed can be split into two halves. In the first half, in that first decade, we fought change. We sued consumers. We sued ISPs, we sued websites. We thought litigation was a solution to our problems. We spent millions on litigation. We lost billions in revenue. In the second 10 years, we gave up on the litigation argument and embraced change and gave the consumer what they had been doing all along, the ability to join the internet and access all the world's music. This time, monetizing the consumption as opposed to, suing against the consumption. And what I like about this story for everybody else, and the book really is for everyone else, it's not for the music industry, is we were first to suffer and first to recover. So my hope is I can tease out 8 lessons to help everybody else now staring at their Napster moment avoid the suffering and get straight to the recovery.
So if you take the music industry's journey, you said it divided into 2. Were there pivotal moments along the way?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few funny ones, actually. When you look at the war against piracy, first thing is it reminds me of my hero in comedy, a chap called Bill Hicks, who passed away in 1994, but his comedy has stood the test of time. He had a famous joke where he said he did an impersonation of George Bush Sr. as president. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are losing the war on drugs." They'd pause and look at the audience and say, "Do you understand what that implies, what he's suggesting? There's a war going on and the people on drugs are winning it. They're stoned, but they're smart." And I saw something similar in terms of losing the war on piracy. Those pirates are smart because clearly they're winning the war that you claim to be losing. And there are so many mistakes along the way. A couple of quick examples. Having anti-piracy adverts at the start of movies in cinemas. Have you ever heard of anything so bizarre? Talk about preaching to the wrong audience. They're the people willing to pay for a cinema ticket. So firstly, you're making their experience less pleasurable because they have to sit through an anti-piracy message. And secondly, you've just introduced them to the form of piracy where they don't need to pay for that cinema ticket. Mistake after mistake, shooting yourself in the foot. In the book, I tell a great story, and I encourage listeners to look at a YouTube commercial involving Pepsi and iTunes, where the idea was that you don't have to buy music in the age of iTunes 2003, 2004. Just buy a bottle of Pepsi, get the code from under the cap, and redeem it against the sale of an iTunes. So you just buy your sugary soda drink, and we'll give you music for free. And that will stop the kids from stealing music. And what did the kids do? They went into the shop, tipped a bottle of Pepsi at an angle, wrote down the code on a piece of paper, put the Pepsi back in the fridge, and got their free music. So they were getting free music without having to consume and damage their teeth with Pepsi Cola. So there's a long list of mistakes made along the way where you can clearly see the legal argument is not going to win. And remember, there was no economist in the business back then. And, moving to London in 2006, becoming this lonely economist in the business, the one-eyed man, the kingdom of the blind, if you want, being able to see that there was a different path to getting ourselves out of this mess. Suing people was not the answer. Fighting change, holding onto the old vine, the notion of Tarzan Economics was not going to be the answer because that old vine was going to let go of us.
So what new ways of thinking, I think you probably alluded to some of them there, but what new ways of thinking did the music industry embrace to weather the piracy storm?
Well, let me just pass praise on to Daniel Ek, my former boss at Spotify, because I remember him saying as far back as 2007, a very articulate point. He said, music consumption is not the problem. People are consuming more music, more types of music than ever before. Music monetization is. Now, you can take a horse to water and expect those kids to go back to buying CDs and downloads. Ain't going to happen. Or you can bring water to the horse and bring what they're used to, enabling access through the internet and monetizing it, and build something that's better than stealing. This is really important. Build something that's better than stealing music, and the people will come. So if you look at the time it takes to take a download off uTorrent, the fastest piracy site I've ever heard of, I mean, it was fast. It was impressive. It was like, wow, I can get the entire Beatles catalog in a matter of seconds. If you look at the speed the Spotify play button was built to work at, it was measured at 285 milliseconds. And that's for a purpose, because the engineer that built that play button that we all love and press today was told to make music feel like it was instant. If you want to beat piracy, it has to feel like you instantly have access to all the world's music. And he asked a psychologist at University of Stockholm, "Excuse me, professor, what in metric terms is instant? What point does the brain no longer see delay?" And the answer was 285 milliseconds. And that's the speed to which the Spotify play button works. So it all sits in this broader picture of when staring disruption in the face, when piracy is eating away your business, don't fight change, build something that's better than what was there before, and the people will come. And today we have over 450 million, maybe 500 million people in the world offering to pay a recurring fee for something you always have done and always will be able to get for free. It's an incredible achievement.
So while at Spotify, I believe you wrote an analysis called The Anatomy of a Hit.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about that, what the key conclusions were, and how other industries might learn from your approach?
Not just other industries, but your industry, James. Your industry especially can learn from this. And what I was getting into with The Anatomy of a Hit, very briefly, is for 70, 80 years, the way you broke a song was to get it played on radio, then get it selling in the shops. The order of events was simple. Radio pluggers lead, record sales followed. There's a famous story of how it worked in America. This is not in my book, by the way, but what the radio DJs would do is open that 12-inch up in the radio station, slice open one side of the record, and out would pop $1,000 and a gram of cocaine. If those two things weren't there, the record was not getting on the radio. If they were there, you got playlisted. So work radio first, work record shop second. What we quickly saw with Spotify is record sales were falling off a cliff, streaming was in the ascendancy, but radio started playing songs based on what was happening on Spotify. So Spotify moved first, radio moved second, which makes the industry wonder, well, why do you still employ radio pluggers? Why aren't you employing playlist pluggers? We were talking here about 2012 to 2017, but to a large extent, this anomaly still exists. You've got to work with the order of events. You've got to eat your own dog food and realize a lot of what you did in the past is no longer relevant because they're looking for different signals. And James, I can stress this even further in music, and then we'll turn to your sector. If you look at what's happening now, I would argue controversially, the conversation happens on TikTok first, then Spotify second, then maybe radio a distant third, fourth, fifth along down the line. There will still be record labels who believe in breaking songs on radio. I think the conversation happens on TikTok. We're entering a post-Spotify economy. But for the magazine and publishing industry, absolutely critical. Where do you go for breaking news? Do you go to quality journalism from the Wall Street Journal or the Guardian? Or do you go to Twitter? And if the story is big enough, do you then go to a newspaper or magazine to read a long-form article composed by a professional journalist? That's an inconvenient truth, but I don't think the publishing industry moves first. I think social media moves first and publishing moves second. I think you could apply the anatomy of the hit to that dilemma.
And in terms of the publishing industry staying afloat, making money, monetizing what they do, how can they work that conclusion or that insight to their advantage?
Well, I think there's a problem here, and I do explore it in a reasonable amount of depth in the book for those who want to go further with this. But I do think that the publishing industry does present a lot of friction to the consumer. Firstly, what data does the publishing industry have? I always love the anecdote of the way that newspaper popularity was measured was by how many newspapers came back to the factory gate after distribution, not how many were sold. So the Guardian sent out 500,000 copies of the newspaper this morning. Tomorrow they'll learn that 150,000 came back to the factory gate. So we can use some quick arithmetic and work out we sold 350,000 copies. If that's the basis of data, then hang your head in shame, given how far music has progressed. It gets worse. Of those 350,000 supposed sales, how many sat on glass tables and offices are, at 20% occupancy? How many were shared? How many were read from cover to cover? How many were flicked through? How many people looked at the adverts? So physical media has that data problem. So I think that's one, but there's a much bigger challenge ahead, which is that what am I interested in? So in music, we would talk about the band or the brand. I might say, James, what band did you listen to this morning? Maybe that was a typical conversation 10 years ago. How about this, James? James, how was your Discover Weekly this Monday? Oh, my Discover Weekly was great. Out of the 30 songs, I loved about 20 of them. Really? For me, 25 of those 30 worked. I had an even better Discover Weekly than you. We are discussing brands, not bands. James, how many of those 20 songs you listened to on Discover Weekly can you actually remember the names of? None of them. So we are in a position now where, what is it that's driving the engagement? Is it the journalist? Is it the subject matter? Is it the publishing brand title? Or is it the platform they consume it on? And I think this is where we are dealing with a really big inconvenient truth in the business, which is all those steps in that ladder present friction to the consumer. I could buy this magazine, find out it's got nothing that's of interest to me, or then go back and buy this magazine, wasted time and money already, and see if that one works for me better. How about you have a kind of Spotify for publishing where they're all there and you're just able to circle, I want to read this journalist, whatever they write about, I want to read on this topic, whoever writes the articles. I'm able to exercise the options in exploring quality journalism that I can't do currently. And that involves a lot of turkeys voting for Christmas. I'm not, naive to that issue. But you have to wonder what's going to stop the market going in that direction anyway. That train is leaving the station. Tech kills friction. And magazines and the publishing industry still have a lot of friction in the relationship with the customer.
And are we talking about the death of print in what you've outlined?
I'll be bold here. I think the best thing newspapers could do today is, guess what? ... Stop selling newspapers. Just like back in the music industry, Simon David Miller, a wonderfully progressive executive at EMI, said to Guy Hands in 2009, the best thing you could do today is stop selling CDs. It's killing your business whilst upholding your business. And, I think letting go of that vine, that inevitable vine which is going to let go of you sooner rather than later, is going to help the internal transition involved. The internal reorganizations that are involved. The reorgs are not easy. They are not easy things to do that will allow the publishing industry to start to move forward.
And would you say the magazine industry is in a similar situation to the newspaper industry?
I think so, but with one slight twist. Now, in the book, this chapter 6, Pivotal Thinking, I explore this notion of what customers really want. And I come to the conclusion they love the thrill of a bargain. They love the thrill of a luxury, but they don't like what's in between. Let me explain. So streaming is a bargain. Next year will be the 20th anniversary of the $9.99 price point. Isn't that surreal? Isn't that crazy? And by the way, the origins of $9.99 was that it was benchmarked against the cost of a Blockbuster video rental card. That's where this $9.99 price point that we pay in 2021 comes from. So it's a bargain. It's got to be a bargain. You're getting more songs for the same price. Inflation is eating away the value of that price. But then you look at vinyl sales, £25 plus postage and packaging. We cannot press up enough vinyl to service demand. It's a big thing. It should be a lot bigger. I can exclusively reveal that today, the British music industry, more than £1 in every 10 going back to record labels comes from first-hand vinyl sales. That's not including the second-hand market, which could be even bigger. Vinyl is now worth more than downloads, CDs, cassettes, and ad-supported streaming combined, the four formats that were supposed to supersede it and declare that vinyl was dead. So the key thing for the publishing industry, and particularly for magazines, is it's the same customer buying both. Repeat, the same customer is willing to cough up £120 a year for streaming and £25, let's say, a month for vinyl records. Their music budget is huge, but it's going to the edges of those extremes. I think with magazines, you could have a bargain content, which is purely online, then a really rich, high quality, beautifully feeling, touching, published physical product, which could command a price, 3, 4, 5 times what they're currently charging, and people would not blink at paying that price. I think people want that. They want possession. Wrapping this one up, there's a magazine publication. Calling it a magazine feels like a bit of an insult. Don't want to offend your listeners here, but called Hidden Scotland, which is made to order, so no returns, no risk. And I think they're charging £15 for an issue, and I'm buying them as gifts. Think about this, £15 for a magazine? Most CFOs would think you're mad. Because it's £15, I deem it a gift. And because I'm living in London and all my family's back home in Scotland, and I like buying them gifts because I miss them so much, I'm buying 5 or 6 copies every time it comes out as a gift. Like the Parker pen. I don't know if your listeners know the story of the Parker pen, but the Parker pen was in the business of putting ink on paper. Along came the biro, which is a way cheaper and more efficient way of putting ink on paper. They thought they were doomed, and then they changed the position of the product to become a gift and made more money than ever before. So, yeah, I think that upmarket area is definitely one to explore, in line with how vinyl has seen this incredible explosion as well.
And is there an upmarket version of on the newspaper side? I can see what you describe in the magazine side. What about there's still many hundreds of thousands of people who like reading a Sunday paper or a print newspaper?
Right. I think the Sunday papers, there's some wiggle room there. But for the general bulk standard bread and butter daily newspaper, I think it's a bit more of an extreme case. Why? Because the content is perishable. Podcasts, by the way, are perishable. So, do you listen to all podcasts? Do you read all newspapers? And this is where the rubber hits the road, which is in terms of recency, it's way easier to see a breaking story on Twitter than it is to see it on the Wall Street Journal. And how do you win that argument for the primacy of news is where that challenge sits. I don't see the upmarket solution. I see a battle for recency solution there.
Now, in the prologue to the book, you write, "We all have a Napster moment. Can you see yours?" You probably hinted at it already, but what is a Napster moment, and what notable examples are there in other industries, I suppose including the publishing industry?
We all have them, and we're all increasingly seeing them as a result of the pandemic. I think this is key, and it was an accident, of course. I started the book off when the world was normal, had to finish it when there was no high street bookshops open. So I lived the pandemic as an author. But for the music industry, again, we saw the entire basis of what music is built around, copyright, just get upended overnight. You could go to Napster in June 1999 and access any song you wanted and not pay a single penny. For the book industry and the publishing industry more generally, I think there's a better one I can give you. And it revolves around a train station that I've been traveling to since I was 6 years old, which is King's Cross. I've been coming down there to visit my grandmother and grandfather for years. I know the station inside out. I know the line between Edinburgh and London so well I can close my eyes and tell you by the sound of the runs of the train where in the country I'm passing. But around about 2013, 2014, they rebuilt King's Cross Station. Possibly one of the most dramatic developments I've ever seen in my life. From the station where you just wanted to get out and get home safely to, now you come off the train, you could have your dinner at King's Cross Station. Can you imagine doing that before the redevelopment? I wrote a joke which you may want to edit out your podcast, which is back then, the old King's Cross, you'd see three types of people: pedophiles, prostitutes, and politicians, often in the same car. But nevertheless,
We'll keep it in.
Okay, so we're now dealing with a new King's Cross, and it's got the biggest concourse of any railway station in Britain. Did anybody notice that WH Smiths were not present in that concourse? That is a Napster moment. Straight up. Since the time of the Victorians, train stations went hand in hand with places you could buy something to read: newspapers, magazines, paperback books. Only in the past 6 months has WH Smith's managed to squeeze a way back into the concourse, so you can buy a newspaper, you can buy a magazine before sitting on a train for 4 hours and 18 minutes to get to Edinburgh Waverley Station. That's a Napster moment. Those glimpses, it's just one observation, it's just one train station, mean the world for an industry that was built around having something to read when you're sitting still. Now we read a piece of glass.
And in terms of similarities between the music industry and the publishing industry, again, you probably hinted at it already, but what could you just go through those again? Similarities between the two sectors?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a very big similarity between the digitization of two sectors, which is a remark that I heard back home in Stockholm. We're talking about Sony Music in Stockholm. Sony were one of the most progressive record labels I can remember, run by an English chap called Mark Dennis, who got what streaming meant from a very, very early age. So within your industry, you'll have those sort of loud minority of people who can say, I can see how it looks on the other side, and we have to get there. I need to let go of this vine and reach out for this new vine. It's the future. Mark Dennis is one of those. And I remember somebody saying, and this is an argument in Swedish, so I'm translating in my head, that said, Sony Music has never been smaller since adopting streaming. The headcount in the company, the gross revenues in the company, it's never been smaller. And this was around about 2016. And then the other person in the room responded by saying, yes, and it's never produced as much profits. And I think that's a beautiful way of just asking your listeners to stop for a second and understand what's happening. How much of the cost of a business is wrapped up unnecessarily in physical distribution, in packaging, in insurance, and how much of that just disappears when you adopt an access model that's purely digital, which doesn't have the legacy systems. So back then, we were transitioning to a business that got smaller but more profitable. Now, as the recovery gathers pace, we're seeing a business get bigger and even more profitable. And 2 weeks ago, James, you just saw Universal complete a spin-off IPO on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. The company now valued at 50 billion. Remember, only a few years ago, SoftBank offered 7 billion for Universal. Now it's 50. So you're seeing it happen in the valuations as well. I think that's a really important lesson.
Now, I believe that in the book you had quite a lot to say about the attention economy.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a bit more about that? That sounds particularly relevant, maybe for publishers.
Absolutely. And it's something that I was able to explore on stage with a mutual friend of ours, Caroline Morgan, a fantastic woman who, like you, is just rolling up her sleeves trying to work out how this sector is going to survive. And the attention economy for me is critical. I mean, let me start off with a couple of sort of left field examples. Here's one. If we go back to the browser wars in the late 90s, you had Yahoo versus Google. And Yahoo's KPI was time spent on the browser. They wanted to keep you there for longest. They had Yahoo Finance, they had Yahoo News, they had Yahoo Mail, all littered around that browser to keep you there. More time spent on the browser, the better. Google had the opposite. Least time spent using our product is the best for our product. Come into Google, there's no adverts, it's just a clear white background with a search bar. Search and we get you to where you want, and you'll leave our platform the fastest. We all know who won the browser wars. And I think we all now know why. Because they optimized for being efficient with people's attention. Getting more out of the same out of less, or even better, more out of less, is boosting the efficiency, the productivity of attention. Now, when you look at what's happening with music, well, firstly, from a user experience, it's faster to find songs, 285 milliseconds. We've discussed that. But something else is happening with attention, which is, firstly, you're seeing that hit songs are getting shorter. In fact, songs today that chart are often done and dusted after 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Lil Nas X, Old Town Road, was fading out after 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Songs are getting shorter. Secondly, the songwriting has changed. Choruses are being moved to the front. So rather than have a guitar solo introduction, a verse, then a bridge, then a chorus, a verse, a bridge, a chorus, a guitar solo, that's gone now. Now we shove the chorus right up at the front. So in an attention-efficient, demanding world, songs are getting shorter and choruses are being moved to the front. Fine. But let's do the economics here and think about how the economics of streaming actually affects songs. Firstly, you only get paid if you've been played for more than 30 seconds. So if I skip James's new track after 20 seconds because it sounds like a dud, you don't see a penny. You need to hook me in for that first 30 seconds. Secondly, and importantly, you don't get paid a penny more for lasting a second more. So why would a rational songwriter write longer songs? There's no incentive to do so. It's not duration-based monetization. So songs are getting shorter, choruses will be moved to the front, and it makes rational economic sense that that should happen. If you think about the band U2 and their best hit of all time, which is Where the Streets Have No Name, in my opinion, you have to wait 2 minutes and 8 seconds before you hear Bono's voice. Now, I want to ask your listeners, I'm going to assume those listeners perhaps are of a demographic where they're largely parents. Ask yourself this question. Would today's millennials, your children, wait 2 minutes and 8 seconds for a song before you actually hear the voice come in? How many of those TikTok millennials have heard Fleetwood Mac? Hundreds of millions. How many of them could say I've listened to a Fleetwood Mac song from start to finish? None of them. That's what we're dealing with attention. Now, a historical point for you, and then an application to the publishing world. The historical point is, whilst this sounds a little bit scary, we've been here before. In fact, throughout my book, when I'm looking at the impact of disruption, there's this deja vu of, we've done this before. And in attention, you only have to look at how jukeboxes in the late 50s and early 60s were designed. The mafia ran the jukeboxes of America, and they demanded songs last no more than 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Why? Because you're paying for on-demand music, just like you do with Spotify, and shorter songs extract more coins from the machine, so you can make more money, just like Spotify. So we've been here before, and it explains how Motown got going. Great music for jukeboxes because all those hits were done after 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And secondly, is just how would this work in your world? I mean, how do we understand how much content is being consumed? I think Medium, well-known blogging website, is beginning to look at duration-based compensation of their writers based on how long you spent reading. Audible, the audiobooks website, could compensate authors on how much books were listened to. But you're moving to consumption analytics. So I think the straw that will break the camel's back on this for the publishing industry is when the creators, not the publishing houses, start to look at, duration-based models of compensation. If I'm going to be paid on the word, how about you pay me on how many of those words were actually read? And that would be a real touch point for the industry to explore.
And would you see the industry exploring it within the current framework, or would the, prominent writers and columnists go elsewhere?
The latter. I think what's going to drive it, and I'm the student, you and Caroline Morgan are the professors in this field, but as a student, I would say it's the latter. I think, let's just run a scenario here. Let's say I employ James Evelegh as a journalist in my newspaper, and he's got a great reputation. He's a columnist, he's got prestige, could be a magazine, could be a newspaper, but either way, you're anchor content. And I fire you for some misdemeanor, whatever, claiming expenses. Not that journalists ever dabble with their expenses. That's quite clear. Now, I fire you 10 years ago. You are toast. You are bad news. You are damaged goods. There's nowhere for you to go. Now, James Evelegh, like a hairdresser in a salon, could leave that salon, go and set up their own salon, take their clients with them, take your readership with you, go to Substack, set up there, make more money, see more of that money, and have complete freedom to write about whatever you want. What's not to like? Well, there are some things not to like, but it's an option worth exploring. And I think the creators, this is going to be a creator-driven change. It won't be intermediary-driven. It's going to happen with the creators. Will start moving across, managing their audiences. If I think about Benedict Evans' newsletter, possibly the Bible for me for the best part of a decade, he's now getting 220,000 people reading that newsletter. Stratechery is way north of 250,000. These are big circulation numbers for one person with the overheads of one laptop and a smartphone to manage. And why would you ever go back to working for the man? Why would you ever go back into business? Why would you go back to this thing called a newspaper? I'm in the business of getting my ideas to those readers, and I don't need you in the middle to do so.
So, well, if you were, managing a newspaper company or a magazine company, and you saw this trend of your top writers slowly but surely going elsewhere and setting up alone, in effect, what would you do with the best interests of your company in mind?
It's the gut reaction to this question, and it's a very apt question, is cost benefit analysis. That is, what are the costs and benefits of staying in, buying into an intermediary? Importantly, what are the incremental costs and benefits? Think of it in a marginal world versus what are the costs and benefits, the incremental costs and benefits of going it alone. And in my book, chapter 4 is dedicated to a title called Make or Buy, which is a universal question we always ask. When do I go it alone and when do I seek control to intermediary? I think that chapter offers a good framework, some good case studies for understanding this as well. I also think there's just maybe a bit more of an anecdotal point of just the ability to try new stuff. Okay, so I work for the firm, you work alone, and this new technology comes along. It could be the next chapter of podcasting, next platform of podcasting. It could be Clubroom, but this time working out as opposed to not working out. Who's going to be the first kid on the block to work out how that works? The firm or the individual? The individual. This educational value of learning how new stuff works in their favor favors those at an individual level as well. Stratechery is now employed sort of AI to talk each newsletter through as a podcast. So now I have it as a podcast that I could listen to and an email newsletter that I could read. And it's all automated. I haven't seen any company with 2,000 headcount work out how to do that, but I have seen one person called Ben Thompson work out how to do it with this newsletter. That speed.
Okay, so if you were the MD of the company, the chief executive, what would you do? Give up, or
no,
try and hold on to these people in another way, or change the way you do business or the way you put content together?
Bribe them? No. It's tricky, but I just think that the newspaper industry and the magazine industry has so much self-interest in holding onto that old vine. Back to an earlier remark, and I got to have balls to be able to come onto your well-respected podcast and say the best thing newspapers could do is stop selling newspapers. But I say that with a view to thinking about the internal organizations, the nitty-gritty of promotions and bonuses and incentive structures, all that stuff. How much of that is wrapped up in a model that you know is dying anyway? Adam Singer, who is responsible for plucking me out of thin air and giving me my lucky break in the music business, had this famous remark about Ofcom, which I hope he doesn't mind me saying, but he once said, Ofcom is constantly obsessed with regulating companies that are trying to put themselves out of business. Like, it's interesting. Like, all these telcos like Virgin Media, I can't wait to get a word out from Virgin Media. I don't want to see those guys invoice me ever again. As soon as G Network comes into this part of London, I'm off. I am off. Like a gazelle, I'm leaving those guys. Newspapers, magazines, Channel 4, please. They're putting this, the party's happening over in tech. Where are the graduates going to? Where are the top graduates going to? They're not becoming bankers, accountants, lawyers. They're going into tech to become software developers. The party's over there. And I think if I was running one of these companies, it'd be working out the make or buy option of what do I cede control to tech platforms and what do I retain control of myself.
And do you think any publishing companies, either magazine or newspaper, are doing a good job of this transition?
Yeah, there's one I want to call out especially, which is within the News Corp group. It's fascinating to go into the Apple News app and see the Wall Street Journal is there. Now, I'm not picking winners or showing preference for favorites here. I want to be completely objective and impartial, but they move first. Now, everybody knows the challenges of playing ball with Apple News. And to prove that I can understand this conundrum, let's think about Spotify for a second. When we're launching Spotify in Indonesia, I know that we could bundle it with a telco and do direct carrier billing, achieve a whole lot of scale and have a whole lot less control, or try and do it myself and achieve very little scale but retain full control. That trade-off is essentially what every newspaper, magazine publishing executive listening will be thinking about in their head. And I love working on this cost-benefit framework as well. But what happens if you move first, even if the costs of losing control to Apple exceed the benefits of whatever revenue and scale you're seeing? What happens if you move first and it's becoming increasingly inevitable that others are going to move second, third, and fourth? I think that's really interesting. And here's why. The subscription numbers touted by newspapers and magazines are missing zeros. They're missing zeros. Like, after I came off stage with Caroline Morgan at the Publishing Expo at the Excel Center, the FT took the stage and said, we've achieved our North Star goal of 1 million subscribers. James, I'm sorry, but Spotify had that by March 2009 in Sweden and Norway alone. Disney Plus, 60 million subscribers in America after 8 months. 1 million subs for a newspaper that's been around since year dot is not a big figure. Wall Street Journal, I think, is at 3 million. It's not a big figure. All other industries and media are achieving subscriber numbers with at least 1 zero, if not 2 zeros, on the end of these numbers. And that's where I come in from outside, and I may well be wrong, but just thinking somehow you've got to put 2 zeros in those subs numbers in the next 5 years, and you're not going to do it alone.
And you mentioned Apple a couple of times, Apple News, the App Store and everything else. Are they central to publishers' future?
Massively. It's becoming increasingly clear that they're parking a tank on everybody's lawn. And this is somebody who's fought the Apple tax war since 2014. The Apple tax, by the way, for those who are not familiar with that expression, is that Apple charges 30% off gross for the benefit of using in-app purchase. So me as a punter, as a customer, if I don't want to give anybody else my credit card details because I've already given Apple's, well, let Apple do the transaction with Spotify. So if you ever heard somebody say, why does it I pay $12.99 for Spotify? My friends are paying $9.99 because they're paying through the App Store. That, by the way, has got a very interesting tweak to it, which it means that when somebody pays through the App Store, Apple makes more money out of Spotify than Spotify did, which didn't make me very happy. But we go into Apple, and just some very, very consumer-based observations. I use Google Chromecast for my TV. Apple TV is inside Google Chromecast, so two big competitors are collaborating. And it's easier to search BBC television channels, that is BBC ITV Channel 4, Channel 5, through the Apple TV app than it is through Google Chromecast, and definitely more so than it is through the Channel 4 app, which I can't even find on my LG Smart TV. So Apple's winning the battle for convenience, and they're only going to keep winning the battle for convenience. And customers like convenience. Can I spell it out to you any clearer? This train has left the station and it's gathering pace. And you can see that happening everywhere. Gaming, ditto. Music, podcast, ditto. So yeah, it's just an acknowledgement of the sort of scale, the sort of numbers they're achieving.
I mean, obviously, we in publishing, we talk about newspapers and magazines, and we don't really go into the book side of things. But the book publishing industry, have you got any observations on that side of things?
It's a hypocrisy of itself. It really is. It's a charade. They publish books about change all the time, and they never change. Like, one of the purposes of my channel, chapter 4, was the Radiohead and Rainbow Story, was to avoid global staggered release dates. They worked this out in 2007. Let's put this album in rainbows out on our own website around the world, so where you could be in Sao Paulo, you could be in Singapore, you could be in Oxford, but you'll still be able to get it on the 10th of October 2007. It's the World Wide Web, people. And 2021, we still have like a 2-month gap between UK and US publication dates. Oh, just a little footnote, the German publication went out today as well, so I've now translated into German. The book is called Disrupt in German because Tarzan didn't translate, so you learn something every day. So yeah, there's that, and then there's just a complete lack of understanding of modern technology as well. During the manuscript review of my book, I talked about data dashboards, and somebody in the publishing house asked, is that something I'll find in my car?
All right, so all sides of publishing have work to do by the side of things.
Well, yeah, I mean, this thing is like, it's easy for me to stand here and say it has to change, it has to accelerate, it has to adopt. But my point is, and I want to really make this point clear, it's happening regardless. Like, imagine like two cars on a busy road getting involved in a bit of a road rage traffic accident, and they get out and they start arguing. and the traffic builds up behind them, and it builds up more and more and more because these two people keep on arguing. Eventually, the traffic works out how to get around those two cars, and life carries on. Then you lose your primacy. That's what's happening. I saw this happen back in 2007 when I saw BBC use YouTube footage in its public service broadcasting. And I remember turning around to a colleague and saying, who's the public service broadcaster here? Now, what happens when you have journalists for newspapers talking about Twitter, or the BBC employing 24 full-time staff in the Twitter head offices? Who's doing the actual journalism? There's some real sort of stare into the abyss questions that need to be asked about this sector for it to work out where it needs to go. Because the key point is the consumer's already there. You're playing catch up.
So in terms of catch up, what does the newspaper and magazine sector need to do next?
I'll give you one example. Is we've not really discussed podcasts much, but if I can just bring books under this umbrella for my answer here for a second, it's very interesting to think about podcasts, firstly, from an attention perspective. I could listen to a song, that's 2 minutes, 30 seconds of my attention, or I could choose at the margin to listen to a podcast instead. Well, that's 45 minutes of my attention. I've only got so much time to allocate to media, and 2 podcasts a day could soak up that entire quota of media time. So it's very interesting from an attention perspective that the magazine, the book, the publishing industry are not discussing podcasts from a cannibalistic perspective. I find that worrying because it just feels to me to be naive, but also as a means to an end. James has got some fantastic ideas. He runs a very respected trade publication. He does other stuff too, but if I can just listen to it as a podcast as I'm cooking, I've got it. I don't need to read anything else. Malcolm Gladwell's got a great history of writing amazing books, although if I can just slight snide remark, he should employ a fact checker from time to time. I did. I paid for mine. But he's got an even better podcast. So if I want Malcolm Gladwell's ideas in my head, it's way more efficient to get it through a podcast than it is through a book. So I don't see people in your industry asking the proper cannibalistic question about what podcasts are doing, A, to attention, and B, as a means to an end. I just really hope off the back of this podcast I can sort of light a fuse on that one.
So what do we do? So take a large newspaper publisher or a large magazine publisher. What do they do tomorrow when they get in? The senior people. What's their next decision? If they had a clean slate, if they could carte blanche.
I mean, this is a hard one for me to give a reasonable and meaningful answer to, but let me try and do it this way. Have a look at your subscriber numbers for whatever publication you've got, or your circulation numbers, if that expression makes any sense whatsoever in 2021. What does circulation mean? Circulates in space and somehow some money comes back. But yeah, whatever the number is, circulation, subscription, have a look at your numbers. Compare in absolute and relative terms with other media industries how big or how small or how pitifully small those numbers are. And then do the following exercise. Stack all your top 5 problems from worst problem that needs solving to the least worst problem that needs solving from immediacy level. Now, pretend you could 5x your subscriber base tomorrow. How would you reorder those 5 problems? I think it's a pretty useful mental exercise to think, I'm heavily influenced by Kevin Systrom and this problems that need solving mantra. I got 5 problems that need solving and I got 1 million subscribers to the Financial Times. Let's say you had 10 million subscribers to the Financial Times. How would those 5 problems that need solving change in order and change in wording? I think that's a useful exercise to do in your head in terms of working out where to get to. What's that expression from the Scottish Tourist Office? If you wanted to get somewhere, you wouldn't start from here. I understand that is a challenge, but I think that 3x, 10x your subscriber base, then reorder the problems that need solving is a great way to think through the challenge that you're facing, but tech is already solving.
And if you're to fast forward 20 years' time, 30 years' time, what do you think the typical publisher will look like in terms of how they do their work?
I think it'll be very similar to Spotify. I think there'll be one app where you can find all content. And the idea of brands and titles just gets lost in there. Do you actually know that when you stream a song on Spotify, it's signed to Universal, Warner's or Sony? No, and to be honest, you don't actually even care. It's irrelevant. What matters is the content you want to hear. That song's got a hook, it's got a melody, it releases endorphins, it does something to your body that makes you enjoy music. That's the alchemy in the room that music is. That's the alchemy in the room. And I think the same thing has to be said for content, which is, I want to be able to, read it on an app. I want to be able to hear it on an app. Give me convenience, bring water to the horse. I expect these standards from all other forms of media. I should absolutely expect these standards from publishing.
And looking at the book, again, a final word, is there any other lessons the industry should take from your experience with Spotify and your broader research into the book?
There's 8 big ones, but if I could tease out a couple and then maybe a couple more for potential authors. There's a chapter called Self-Interest versus the Common Good, which looks at the need for collective solutions. And in that chapter, I introduced Groucho Marxism, not Karl Marxism, who lived very close to me here in Kentish Town, but Groucho Marxism. And I love the things that Groucho Marx said. I mean, maybe an apt one for this conversation is when Groucho Marx said, "I love television. What a great invention. Whenever I switch it on, it reminds me to read a good book." But something else that he said, which I really explore in depth in the book, is I would never want to join a club that would have me as a member. That is economic poetry. And you can apply it to whenever you try and forge collective solutions. And you can see this in your world straight up. But let's talk about football for a second. What happened with that European Super League fiasco? 6 clubs in Britain decided that they'd never want to join a club that would have them as a member. They wanted to join a better club that wouldn't have them as a member. They wanted to leave one collective and form a separate collective. That's Groucho Marxism. So I think the book it's interesting how the book comes to life with real events. And I'm getting a kick out of that. My passion is teaching economics, and to see that happen in soccer and then be able to apply the book so beautifully to that, it fits like an O.J. Simpson glove, and that makes me happy. Second thing from the book is big data, big mistakes. And it's very easy for a consultant or an external person to come up to a newspaper or magazine executive and say, "You need big data. You got to embrace big data." I'm sorry, but I'm calling time on this. Way too much Kool-Aid has been drunk on big data, and it's time to stop. There is 9,000 books on Amazon today with the words big data in their title, all celebrating the amazing things it can achieve. I'm not denying that. All I'm saying is swing the pendulum back to this thing called common sense for a second and see if that could help avoid the mistakes with big data. For example, instead of Radical Idea Part 1, looking at data points of the consumer, how about listening to the consumer themselves? Ask yourself this: do you know where your customer service team is in your company? And if you don't, then you are the problem. If you've never visited them, you are the problem. What I loved doing was going up to Cambridge, don't know why Spotify's customer service team was in Cambridge, and listening directly to the customer. They've got pulses, dashboards don't, and you learn stuff when you listen to customers that you will never learn when you look at data dashboards. We sold Family Plan at a time when we were depreciating Spotify for an old iPhone. And customers were calling us up saying, "Why is Spotify not working on the iPhone 2 or the iPhone 3? Because we have to make this decision where we're not going to bill for that operating system anymore. But I passed my old iPhones down to my children, which is why I invested in Family Plan." You don't find those observations by looking at data. You find by listening to the customer who creates the data. And that's critical. So that's critical. Last 2 comments there is just for anybody thinking about writing a book. 2 points. One, a quote from James Anderson, the head of Baillie Gifford, this huge Scottish investment fund manager, biggest shareholder in Tesla, biggest shareholder in Spotify even. I went up to Edinburgh to watch Hearts versus Wraith Rovers, and I met him outside the ground, and I told him, "Just so you know, James, next month you'll see something in the news, which is I'm going to step down from Spotify." Talked with Daniel about it, talked with the team. Everyone's supportive. My parents are supportive, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to write my first book. It's a burning ambition. It's going to finally happen, James. He said, "You're writing a book?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going to write a book." He said, "That's a terrible idea. It's like playing tennis with yourself." So if anybody thinking about writing a book wants to know what it's like, it is like playing tennis with yourself. For 18 months, you sit in the British Library staring at a paragraph that's not growing, wondering, what am I doing with my life? It's lonely. And then on the end of the journey, when I learned that the book was in production, this is around about January of this year, I actually learned that there's a factory somewhere in the middle of England producing 30,000 copies of Tarzan Economics. Thinking my mum and dad are going to have a published author as a son. This book is dedicated to them. And I remember calling up Adrian Furnham, an organizational psychologist, very famous one, 40 books to his name, 5,000 published academic papers. I called him with tears in my eyes, James, tears in my eyes. I said, Adrian, you won't believe it, but somewhere in the middle of England, they're producing my book. It's going to be on factories soon. It's going to be in bookshops soon. It's happened. I've made it. And he said to me, well done, Will. You've done a fantastic job. Your book will be an immense success, and you're clearly incredibly talented. Now, I want you to sit down for a second and reflect, because you're about to learn what it means to be a sperm donor, because that's all you are.
Right.
The realization that it's all about this sperm that I created in 18 months. No, you're one of 80 that publishers got in that quarter, and you're on a petri dish, and you might find an egg, you might not. So from playing tennis with yourself to becoming a sperm donor is a nice way to kind of, have I used the pun bookend the journey of an author? Do you get that
Yes,
one?
I think it is. So I can take it there aren't any follow-up books in the pipeline.
Well, I tell you this, being completely frank, I'll never stop loving the art of teaching economics. I just love teaching it to people who don't think they understand it, they don't want to understand it, but they have to. And if a book allows me to do that, so be it. If a podcast allows me to do that, so be it. But that's the means to an end, is to get the message across without crossing over.
So what's in the pipeline for over the next 12 months, Will? More promotion for the book or moving on to other projects?
Paperback on the 6th of January, James, which is going to be a big thing if WH Smith is not insolvent. It won't be a big thing if they are insolvent. I think that's the best way to understand the economics of the staggered release schedule there. But yeah, let's hope that, and if you're listening, WH Smith, let's discuss best mates discount rates. The 6th of January is the paperback, and I see myself in full book mode there. After the paperback's finished, March, April time, what I've been doing whilst in limbo with the book is practicing what the book preaches. I worked with the company Dice, ticketing platform. They just raised $112 million, largely from SoftBank. They want to take out Ticketmaster. It's been great looking at that as an example of Tarzan Economics, letting go of Ticketmaster booking fees and embracing an online app-based alternative. But I'm really fascinated with an app called Uptime, which takes books, those things we're discussing, and turns them into 5-minute app experiences. Like Blinkfist turned it into 15, back when songs used to last 3 minutes. Now Uptime's turning them into 5 minutes, like songs are lasting 2 minutes long. So an app like that is, that's what jams my juice. That's what really gets me going. Whatever I need to do, it has to give me goosebumps. But I love what Uptime is doing. Making it possible to digest the core message of a book in less than 5 minutes makes a lot of sense to me.
And finally, Will, a question we ask all our guests on the podcast: outside of work, how do you relax?
Well, I don't sleep. That's a key answer. I work on music. So once a year, I put out a mix and we're in production. So in the next 3 weeks, you'll be seeing a mix going on Mixcloud. And I put a lot of effort into finding, sourcing, interviewing the musicians I want to put on my mix. And yes, it's a 1 hour mix and it does very well. It gets to #1 in the global charts, which is great. But it's the artists who are on there to see how I can help them move forward. So the artist Yeba, which is Abby spelled backwards, I've been working with her for a long time, and now you're seeing her appear on Ed Sheeran records, performing with The Roots. She's been featured by just everyone and anyone at the moment. She's a hot artist, but to see the journey she's been on from day one has been fascinating. So, every time I put out this mix, there'll be 15, 20 songs there. The hope is 1 or 2 could catch a fire and go off on a beautiful journey. So always trying to break music. You got to understand one thing about me. I'm music first, economics a distant second.
Well, you've obviously managed to combine the two over your career with some success.
Well, the last words of the book say, don't wait for your job description, create your job description. And please let that be a mantra for every graduate leaving university this year.
Will Page, thank you very much for being our guest on the In Publishing podcast.
Thank you, James. It's been a 10. Thank you so much.
A final word from our valued podcast sponsor. Air Business is trusted by 4,000 publications and 3 million happy subscribers, with 10 million customer records on file. It processes £500 million each year in 22 currencies and delivers over 300 million items. Find out more at airbusiness.com. many thanks to Will for his fascinating insights on digital disruption and what it all might mean for the publishing sector. For me, the key takeaway is that we must not be afraid to think radically about what our customers want and how best we can provide it. You can find out more about Will's book at tarzaneconomics.com. Will is also a regular podcaster himself. His Bubble Trouble podcasts feature him in conversation with independent analyst Richard Kramer. Find out more at bubbletroublepodcast.com. To find out more about us, to register for our newsletter or magazine, or listen to previous podcasts, please go to inpublishing.co.uk. Thank you for listening, and do join me in 2 weeks' time for another podcast. Bye for now.